Hey everybody, Braden here. Welcome back to another video. Today we are going to be talking about something very important here. We're going to be talking about the Rook Checkmate. This is also just like a video I posted a few days ago. Very important. Before I covered the Queen Checkmate, this time we will be covering the Rook one, of course. So before we actually get into the procedure of it, let's talk about a few things here. What's the difference between the Rook and the Queen? So this is going to be a bit obvious. Let's just make some moves here. Just so we have the king out of the way. Bam, bam, bam. Okay, cool. How does the Rook move and what are we aiming for? Before, when we were using the queen to restrict the king, we could just move the queen and then force the king to the side of the board because we would have to just give up a move. You'd have to move it somehow, and then we could just keep making a knight move away from it, forcing it into one corner. Here, that's a little bit different. We cannot just use the rook. Why is that? Let's look at what the rook controls as opposed to the queen. Here, when we look, the rook here creates 4 quadrants, but as we might notice, there's a hole. The hole is right here. It's being able to attack the rook in the first place. So if the king is on a diagonal square here, normally, again, if this were a queen, this would not be possible, but since it's a rook, the king or the rook can actually be attacked here by the king. The king can actually go to this square and force it to move along the file here. So, unfortunately, now we know, of course, that this is going to be a problem. This also tells us we cannot restrict the king with the rook alone. So, going back to the starting position, this is the easiest way to start looking at it. What we're going to need to do is use the rook and the king together in order to mate the opposing king. So let's start with looking at where we're going to go. So for this exercise, one thing I like to do is what's the corner that we're kind of looking at? The top right corner. If the king was like over here instead, then maybe we go to the top left, but just for all intents and purposes, we're going to be going to the top right with every intentional move. So we're going to be restricting them either to the right or forward. It's just good to know which corner we're going to try to get them to. And just one other thing to mention, we want to start off by restricting them off a file or rank, just the side of the board. So the A file, H file, 8th rank, or the 1st rank. It doesn't matter which one we choose. It's just important that we choose one, and we also choose a corner specifically, as the king will have to be forced near a corner in order to deliver this checkmate by force. So king e2 to start, which just improves our king. And now king f4. So after king to f4, how do we restrict the box? Now, again, if you watched the previous video, we talked about something called the box, which is where, essentially, when we look at how the rook, the queen in that case, moved, we noticed that there was a box here where the king could not actually escape for black. And instead here, we're creating a box, but by using the king to cover the rook, just to defend the rook here. So a way to restrict the king in this position is by playing rook d3. We're going to be going about this in a very slow way, just because it's more instructive in order to do it kind of in a slower, less accurate or less speed efficient way, but a very safe one nonetheless. So as we can see here, the rook is actually defended because of the king. So therefore, it's a perfect box. And if we just gave up our move non-stop here, the king cannot escape from inside this box. It cannot move outside of the green squares here. So now we see king to e4, and this is the most challenging move. Normally, if we had a queen, we could just make a knight move here, which, you know, would be like queen d2 or queen c3, but that doesn't make sense here. If we go rook c3, we're allowing king d4, and if we go rook d4, well, maybe they go king f4, and yeah, this could potentially make progress after rook d4, but there's kind of a better way to do this. We want to just make sure we're not actually increasing the size of the box at all, and the way we can do this is just to shuffle our king. So again, since the box is actually perfectly covered here, let's just shuffle with our king and force them out of this corner. Once that happens, we have two different plans that can occur. Either if they play king f4 or king e5, moving forward or back. Moving diagonally, it won't matter as much. King d2 we'll start with here. If king f5, then we can restrict however we want, either rook d4 or rook e3. Both moves will close the box and make it smaller. But here after king d2, let's look at the other two moves. So king f4, this one is a little bit less tougher to see how we're going to restrict the box. We're just going to go rook e3 here. And as we can see, we just shifted it over one file. There are now less squares for this king to move. Now going back here, what if king e5? This is a bit tougher of the two variations that are more important. Of course, again, this king f5 move going diagonally isn't as important here. So the way we can actually improve and make progress in this position is by breaking the box, surprisingly. So unfortunately, if we do not break the box in this position, it's not really possible to make progress. So here, it's important to note that the king is pretty far away from actually getting through this barrier. So if the king was like on g4 or something, king e3 would be bad. But in this case, king e3 is fine, because although these squares are no longer covered, and I'm going to visualize that by just showing what the box looks like now, we actually use the king kind of like a little box here, where of course they do have a way to escape, but they're just too slow. And when they try to escape, they're just one move away here, as we can see, again, just re-visualizing the box. Now we play rook d4 and we're just in time to keep them inside. And we actually just shrunk the box even further. So again, king to e5, most challenging move. What do we do here? Just a little bit of a quiz, try to find out what we should do as white. That's right. Again, we just make a waiting move. It doesn't really make sense to make waiting moves with the rook, in my opinion here, just because, again, we are increasing the size of the box, and that's a bit counterintuitive. Instead, keeping the box the same amount and only moving the rook when we can restrict their king further is the better strategy here. King to d3. Now there's king f5 and king e6. So king f5, we have rook e4. And king e6, what do we do again? It's important to remember the idea of obstructing our box just temporarily. We can play king e4. Again, now our king controls these two squares. These are the important ones. And also our rook controls these ones. Again, it's very important to mention they are not able to actually get outside of this box. We're just in time. And another thing is if king f6, this move doesn't really make as much sense because king g5, check. Sure, now we can start restricting them against this side of the board, but you know, we're trying to make this a bit more easy to understand, where we're just going for the same corner using the exact same two methods, either bringing the king in or moving the rook over to the right. So king to f5, again, rook to e4 is playable, king to g5, king to e3, king to f5, and what do we do here? Great. Yeah, just king f3. Again, the box is completely covered. The one thing we don't want them to like have available here is obviously to take the rook. We don't want to move the rook, increasing the size of the box. Instead, we just want to move our king, force black to move, which is called a zugzwang, and after white moves, black is forced to give up some sort of squares in order for us to get more control and restrict the king further, as mentioned before. So king f6, king to f4, king to g6 here. So again, looking at the obstruction of the box, if they were on h5, then it would be a little different. Maybe they can play king h4. Of course, then we do have other ways to obstruct, but for, again, our purpose here, we're trying to get them into this corner or in this area here where they're stuck in one of these parts where the arrows were there. So now after king g6, rook e5, restricting the box further, king f6, king to e4, king to f7, king to f5, the same idea, nothing has changed, king g7, rook to e6, king to f7, king to e5, nothing's changing at all. Black is attacking the rook, and that's the only square in which they can do so. So we just make a waiting move with our king, defending the rook. Now the king has to move, king g7, rook f6, and they are almost forced to go onto the side of the board. Here, technically, they are forced to, but we can't really do anything about it quite yet. King g8, king f5, king g7, and now we can do something about it. After king g5, with this zugzwang again, king h7, now we have rook g6. If king to g8, then we could just go king g6, king h8 is forced, rook h8, or rook f8 would be checkmate. Or if they go to h8, we have both rook g6 and rook f7. Both would win, and we're going to get into how to do those after. But what if they go king h7 with rook g6? Well, now they have two squares they can move to. And this is very similar to what we saw with the queen. We wanted to make sure that the queen actually does not touch these two squares, because since the queen controls this square here, the h7 square, because it controls squares diagonally, this would be stalemate after king to h8 here. So the king would or the queen would have to actually be where the king is now, either on e7 or on g5, in order to avoid that stalemate. Here it's different because again we do not control the square diagonally, so we're not as worried, and now they have to shuffle between these two squares. So what do we do now? We successfully got the king into the corner and also to the sides of the board. Where's the progress to be made? Now, what we can do is we can actually just reorganize our king. Just move it to a better square where it can allow a potential mate. So when we see this box, let's just make the arrows here, and we see exactly how it's formed. This might look familiar. This looks a lot like a back rank checkmate. If we can somehow control these squares without the rook, and then just play rook h6, it's checkmate. And we can actually do that by bringing our king to f7. So let's see how this is done. King f6, king h7, king f7, and now king h8. And again, now the king controls these squares. Rook h6 will be checkmate because all of these squares are covered. The king cannot move. But, of course, what if it's not our move here? Let's say king f5 and we waste the move, because we might actually get into a position like this where all of a sudden we cannot play rook h6 because we're just giving up our rook. We don't really want to move it to increase the box either, but this is one other instance of zugzwang we should be very familiar with here. Let's look at the box again. The king is controlling and the rook is controlling these important squares that I've highlighted on the G file, and the rook is also controlling the square on the H6 square, or the H file. So we want our king to control these three, because that's actually very important, the red squares here, because if we play king f6, wasting a move, this looks tempting, but rook h6 isn't actually checkmate yet. Instead, what we can do here is we can make sure that our box actually does not change, but we give up the move. And that can happen by moving the rook along the 6th rank. So rook to e6, for example, it doesn't really matter which square you go to as long as this h6 square is covered. Again, it's very important to mention that these two are covered by the king. Actually, the third one as well. But both pieces cover that square, so that's less important. Now, the king has to move and checkmate. So going back, again, just mentioning all of the ideas that we saw here, we saw this concept of zugzwang, which is essentially we give up a move, or we kind of waste a move in order to tell us where black's trying to go. And once we know where black is about to move, that can actually help us in restricting them further. Because we can't really push them, we can't just keep checking them in order to checkmate here. What we have to do instead is just let them walk and then close the barriers around them as they walk around. Again, just a quick mention here, if you see this square, now rook d3 makes it even smaller, king to e4, now king to d2, that's the important move, because again, if you move along this side, the 3rd rank, then it's not really actually restricting the king, it's not forcing them to this corner here. Instead, king to d2 looks like a completely useless move, but it actually is improving our chances, and not improving our chances, it is actually just getting us towards where we want to go, which is to that corner and checkmating black. And again, it's all based off of the idea of this kind of box that we see here, where black is stuck in it. We need to be defending our rook. We have many moves we can make. We can always shuffle between these two squares at the very least, so we're never really too concerned. And both squares control this e3 square, which is where we might want to go if they move backwards. Again, if they move diagonally, we can play it slow as if they just moved right. And if they move right, then we just move our rook over. And does not matter however they play here. Whenever they go to the corner, we can just shuffle between these two, and they're forced to give up that corner. You can see how checks don't really help in a position like this. They're forced to move somewhere. We move in. We create this like temporary box, which looks a little unsecure, but we're just in time to secure it because they're too slow to get out, as we can see there. So hopefully that was helpful. I would recommend that, although you've seen this, that you also try this against a computer or with a friend, even on your own with a board, just because it's best to make those types of mistakes where maybe you're messing up on the conversion. It's better to make the mistakes in practice than in a real game, because that would be a shame. That rhymed. So that will cover it. I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you guys in the next mating video where we cover the two bishops. Have a good one. Bye-bye.